This episode is made possible by our sponsor, Landmark College, the college for students who learn differently, offering comprehensive supports for students with ADHD and other learning differences, both on campus and online. Learn more at lcdistraction.org.
Welcome back to Distraction. I am your temporary host, René Brooks, and tonight I am sitting down with the fantastic producer of Distraction, Miss Sarah Girton.
Hello. Thank you, Renee. I don't know why I just said that way. I sound like a goofball, but
Because we're excited. Awkward girls unite.
and I am a goofball, so.
Same.
But yeah, the reason why I'm here today is because I thought it would be great for our listeners, since they've been hearing your voice for about, a little over a month or so. You did an awesome job during ADHD Awareness Month, and the guests you brought on were just incredible. But I thought it would be interesting to hear a little bit more, and you could share a little bit more about who you are and your background and some of your experiences, and just a way for our listeners to get to know you a little bit better.
I like the sound of that. Whatever you ask, I'm sure I'll have some kind of answer for you. You never know what'll come out of my mouth next. Even I don't know.
Well, and we can always edit. We won't edit.
Like, cut all of that. She's gone rogue.
Yeah. Well, and we're used to that in ADHD land. So we like rogue. But so you were on the podcast. Initially how we got introduced to you was when you were on the podcast, our audience anyway, about a year
Yep.
ago. And you talked about your diagnosis and how you were diagnosed 3 times,
Mhm.
or like you
Yeah.
3 times, until like from childhood through adult, until you were finally diagnosed for real.
Yes.
As an adult. Were you 25?
25. What? Your
Okay.
memory is good. You sure you don't want to tell my story instead? She's got an ear for detail.
I looked it up before. No, I didn't do that.
Look, even if you did, that's impressive.
No. I did remember that. Well, your story is impressive, and I really remembered you as a guest on the show, and that was part of why I thought you would be so great as a guest host, so you're memorable.
Thank you.
So we'll put a link in the show notes to that episode with Dr. Hollowell, where you talked about being diagnosed and all that. So if people want to hear that part of your story,
For sure.
they can go back and hear that. But today I wanted to talk more about, like, you personally, since being diagnosed, what life has been like and how you help other people now.
Okay, cool. You know what? That's the fun part, because that's usually how it goes. Like, how'd you get here? And you're just kind of like, I don't know, things were screwy, and then I drifted along for a while and figured it out. Like, this is why people think people are overnight successes, because they don't get to see any of like the grunt work or crying your eyes out.
So when you were finally diagnosed at 25, what was going on in your life at that point?
So I was working for a government agency that helps seniors with their health care. You know the one I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't doing well. Like, I had started the job, I really liked it, and I was good at it. And I got good at it very quickly. And then as time went on, it just started to get harder and harder for me to concentrate. And things at home were not good. And I decided that I needed to go talk to a doctor about depression, because that seemed to be something I'd struggled with for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, this is clearly something to do with this depression that I've been avoiding dealing with for years. Let me go get some treatment for the depression. And so we sat and kicked that can down the road for about 6 months. And I just so happened to mention accidentally to my therapist, hey, when I was a kid, they had this thing that they thought I had. And my mom said, you're not going to drug my kid up. And I went to continue my sentence, and she stopped me mid sentence. sent me down the hallway to her colleague who assessed people for ADHD. And she said, once you've made the appointment with him, you come back and we'll get started again. And that was when I went and sat down with this guy. He had the best sweater. Like, I feel like I only get to tell this story occasionally. It was like this really nice, like, I live in Pennsylvania, so this is like Mister Rogers land, and he had a great Mister Rogers sweater, and I felt like I was sitting down with somebody's grandpa, and he was gonna tell me how to fix this thing, and he did.
Hmm.
He did.
Yeah. Once you got your diagnosis, I mean, things couldn't have changed that quickly.
Not at all.
What happened?
So, when you're first diagnosed, I think a lot of us go through that experience of it's like this mixture of relief and regret and excitement, and this period where you spend a good deal of your time explaining to the other people in your life what ADHD is like. Like, "Oh, I've been looking and I do this thing that you tell me annoys you all the time because of this," or "This is what's happening when I show up late." It's like you're learning a language and trying to teach it at the same time, but the other people don't wanna learn the
Mm.
language, they just want you to stop irritating them. And so, you've got these kind of unwilling students that you're dragging along with you on the journey, like, "No, come on, don't you wanna hear
Yeah.
about the ADHD stuff?" And they're like, "No, leave me alone." And,
Yeah.
I started taking medication, and I wound up shortly thereafter, I went back to work, and the job was easy again, and I did well at it again, and I got a job offer in North Dakota and left, and then was not on meds again, and then did not do well at the job again, and 6 months later, found
Oh,
myself back
wow.
home. Like, you the story because people see you in a position that looks successful now, they think, "Oh, she got diagnosed, it was smooth, it was great." It was horrible.
Right.
And I think it made it even more horrible because I knew what was going on, and the medication that I take is very expensive. It's great medicine, I'm not complaining about that part, but it wasn't affordable while I didn't have any health insurance, so there I was kinda paddling
Oh.
along, trying to, it was like everything that I could possibly have done to make this more stressful, I did. Moved in with a boyfriend who eventually I married. Stressful. It was our first apartment, so our first experience ever living together with unemployment. Like, it was just
Wow.
is a mess.
Yeah.
And then I wound up getting a new job back in health insurance and kinda started picking my way back out of there, and
How long was that?
about a year, year and a half.
Wow. Which it doesn't sound like a long time, but when you're in the every single day, that's really
It's
tough.
misery, and then, the not having a consistent job or being on unemployment leads to other problems, so then you're down to 1 car, and then you live in an area where you need a car to have a job, and you gotta figure out how to get a car, but you can't get a job to get the money to get the car.
Yeah.
So
It
it
snowballs.
does. So it was pretty miserable. And then I started working back in healthcare, and one of the best things about those kinda jobs is the very first day you get insurance. So I was
Mhm.
like, "Oh, yeah, come on." Called the doctor, like, "Write me my script. I am coming to get it."
Yeah.
And so we got the script.
Oh, Renee, that's really tough though, because
It was hard.
it's unfair. Like, I mean, that's life. Life is unfair, but you know what can help you and you just can't get it.
And unfortunately, if I had been thinking about it, I probably would have tried some of the generic meds and at least tried to see how they would work for me. Later on, I did wind up trying one or two. They didn't work well. Like,
Hmm. Did any well, but did anyone suggest that to you at the
no, and
time,
that's
or
the funny thing, like, and all of us, it was an unusual thing for all of us to do because, again, I worked for health insurance. I know that there's generic options. The doctor knows
Yeah.
there's generic options. The pharmacist knows there's generic options. And isn't it funny that none of us thought do something
Huh.
generic?
That just, I mean, it's one example of how you're kind of alone in your healthcare journey, just
It's
one small
a little
example.
thing, and I tell people all the time, like, I think that I'm fortunate that I was in the career that I was in because who knew I was gonna have chronic health conditions that I would be managing for the rest of my life in my early 20s.
Mhm.
But I wound up in a place where I really learned how to advocate for myself and what options were available to me and what my rights were and what they could say to me and what they couldn't say to me and what I was supposed to do if they did any of the things that they weren't supposed to do to me or anybody else that I know.
Mhm.
And so that's really been an advantage that I was able to to work from to get myself the things that I needed. Like there was a point um 2 or 3 years after that decided I needed a better job and got a job that I absolutely detested. By the way, at the job that I got after my unemployment stint, I was so good at the job that they had me training other people to do the job, but I couldn't get a raise at the job because I was always just a minute or 2 late. And so they would put me on an action plan for my lateness so you could benefit from my talent, but you weren't gonna pay me more because I couldn't be there on time. Thanks, ADHD. So there I was,
Wow.
and we're not talking about a significant amount of time here. We're talking about 5 minutes,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
And that 5 minutes and them not giving me a raise led to them losing an employee they would have preferred to keep,
Wow.
but they couldn't give me a raise. This place was offering me, I don't know, 3 or $4 more an hour, which seemed like a fortune at the time, especially for a person who'd been married for less than a year. And,
Yeah.
yeah, the boyfriend who we moved into the house with after North Dakota, he's now husband. And, at some point, like, everyone's relationships have tumultuous times, but that relationship, was very emotionally abusive, and so at some point, I found myself in a mental hospital for depression that completely went down to the point where I was like, "I need to check myself in," and so I did.
So you do have depression as well as ADHD.
Oh, for sure. Like, I know some people are misdiagnosed, with depression instead of ADHD, but I actually do have
Mhm.
depression. I have, it's called dysthymia, which is a fancy way of
Mhm.
saying that I've always got low level depression. So
Oh, that's a fun one.
yeah, I'm
Jeez,
permanently
Renee.
depressed. Would you believe it? I'm always
Oh,
so cheerful. Nobody ever believes.
I mean, you really are. I wouldn't have said that, I mean, I don't know if that's you covering or
Sometimes it
just
is, but most of the time, you know what? It's entirely possible to have something like this and still be a relatively happy person. Like, I think
yeah.
I don't think my life is that much worse than anybody else's. Of course, like, I say this coming off of, like, the worst year ever, but what aren't we all having the worst year ever? Like,
Some more than others. I mean,
yeah, it's true. It's been a real taxing year, but I think the thing for me is I'm just at least we're having a moment where we're breathing, so we'll
Yeah.
just leave it
Yeah.
there.
You're getting some balance. That's
Exactly, like, just give me a minute.
right.
So, I found myself in the mental ward and I said all this to tie into the fact that knowing your rights as a patient and knowing what's available to you as a patient can be so helpful because I went into the hospital for inpatient hospitalization and I got there and the care wasn't what I needed, and the place was a place I didn't feel safe in. But I made it a point to check myself in because I knew if they 302'd me, that they would control when I came out. And I wanted to make sure I was in control over when I came out.
What does 302 mean?
Involuntarily it's called something different every place, but it's
Okay.
involuntarily being hospitalized.
Gotcha.
I knew what I told them would make them have to hospitalize me, but they would give me the option of choosing hospitalization versus them forcing hospitalization. which, like, while we talk about privilege a lot, like, it's a privilege to be able to make those kinds of decisions and have those kind of options in the moment, and a lot of people with mental health conditions where they're not lucid can't make those decisions. So, I feel for them, but
Right. That's a good point, though, for anybody with ADHD to know their rights so that you can advocate for yourself.
yes, we need to know, like, because one of the things I was able to do once I decided this isn't the place for me, and I'm still the one who gets to make the decision. So I was able to say to the nurses, "Look, this is not what I need. I would like to talk about transitioning away from here to," they call it partial hospitalization, which basically means you go home and you go to a facility during the day. So um,
Mhm.
there was group therapy there for me, and it was really helpful to sit around and talk to people and get to know them, and they would check my meds every week and make sure that everything was adjusting well. And it was just a step below the level of care that I was already in terms of, heightened security, but it was enough to keep
Mhm.
me safe, and I felt safe because I wasn't in the hospital, like, I was at home. So I was able to go
Mhm.
back and forth to partial hospitalization, and that was a good transition to get me back into working and doing and being for the time.
Mhm.
And,
Wow.
so that was really like, it was a really revelatory experience for me. Actually, I wrote an article about it for Healthline. I'll have to link you to it. It was a good article.
Yeah.
Um, but depression can get very, very frightening, and it was. So
Yeah. And that was while you were still
that's while I was
married?
still married. So we get through that, and then we go into, I guess this is when we started realizing that this is an abusive relationship and it's not gonna improve. So trying to plan an exit strategy from that, which was very, very
Mhm.
difficult and is very difficult for a lot of women. And it took me, let's see, took me another 3 years to get out after that, I believe.
Wow.
Between, you decide that you're going to leave, and then you go, "Well, maybe it's not that bad, and I can stretch it out and stay," and then maybe you leave for a while and come back. Everyone's got, they say it takes an average of 7 times before a person leaves their abuser, and emotional abuse can be subtle, and it's easy to
Mhm.
convince yourself that maybe you're just being too sensitive, especially when you're a person with ADHD who has grown up your whole life being
Right.
told you're too sensitive, you're too much, you're too this, you're too that.
Right.
So you really have this other layer of second guessing yourself. So it was, yeah, about 3 years later that I started, no, look, I'm about to skip the part of the story, which is the part that brought us here. I'm telling my story. I'm skipping the black girl lost keys part. Alright, so let's back it up. A year after the psych ward, I spent a long time working on my own mental health and trying to get into, how I could really learn how to manage this better because, they really don't tell you much. They tell you you have these things and they just kinda go, "Okay, now here's some of the things you can do to treat it, the rest you're just gonna have to learn about." And so I started discovering different groups that would help me learn that there were other people like me. When you're first diagnosed, it's a very isolating experience. If you don't know, like, you're diagnosed with this thing you don't know anything about, nobody else in your life understands what it means, and they just know that they're frustrated and you're frustrated, but you're working on a change, but they want you to change maybe faster than what you're capable of changing. And maybe they're asking you to change some things that you shouldn't change, which is a whole nother conversation that we need to have sometime. But you're going through all of that. And so I just wanted to get a handle on it. And during that time, I found an ADHD coach, and she really sat me down and helped me learn what worked for me and taught me like how the ADHD brain worked. And I finally started to understand why I was doing things the way that I did them and how I could do more of the things that I liked and how I could, supplement in the areas where I was struggling. And it all started to make
Hmm.
so much more sense. And right about then was the time that I decided to start Black Girl Lost Keys in late 2014, December 2014.
Yeah.
So I start Black Girl Lost Keys and I write and I've got this new job and I'm loving it. I started a crochet shop. By the way, don't turn a hobby that you like into a store of any kind because you will hate it.
A jobby.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
Yeah. Then it turns into work. But wow, so wow.
And so Black Girl Lost Keys was kind of like what I did to avoid the lesser of, fun realities of living with someone who is constantly denigrating you. And so it was really
Mhm.
a place that I was able to go, and it was cathartic, and I was still learning so much about ADHD and working with the coach and living through all of that. It was still pretty hard. So,
Yeah.
2016, I started the process of divorce. And then I lost my job, like a lot of people who are, leaving a domestic violence situation do.
So you went through your divorce or that
Went through the divorce, jumbled around career-wise for a while,
still doing the blog?
still doing the blog the whole time because it was cathartic, and there were so many
Yeah.
things that like, the beauty of learning about this while I was in the process of getting out of that relationship was figuring out how much of it really wasn't me, and some of it was just abusers oppose you intentionally. So they will
Mhm.
do things to throw
Mhm.
you off. And so I was learning how to manage it in my own way for the first time while also dealing with this really complicated process that requires executive function. And so
Wow.
the work just kept me sane, and it grew into me graduating from doing coaching individually as often for myself, and I decided I wanted to become a coach because the skills I learned in coaching helped me to rebuild my life, and really, like, not even just the skills you learn, like, just I think one of the most helpful things about the coaching was, like, even though we weren't talking about the crappy abuse stuff, because that's really more of a therapy thing,
Mhm.
it was, like, being able to say, "This is what I need to do," and being able to come up with a plan to execute it with someone who was there and understood the way that my mind worked, gave me a place every week where I could check in with myself and see what was happening and what needed to happen, and also with someone who has an accurate idea of how far I've come, because we're not very good at that.
Mhm.
We only see the like, I believe it was Ned who said that there's now and not now.
Mhm.
We
Yeah.
don't know what's going on in not now. Not now includes the past. And so it can be easy to lose sight, and when you can't remember, like, it might be considered a nice thing to forget your losses, but when you can't remember your wins, it can be hard to, build
Right.
build that confidence up.
That's a really good point.
It was a real big turning point for me, and then
And you must have been getting positive feedback on the blog, like,
always, constantly.
it was resonating, and I see that now on Twitter with people commenting, "Oh my gosh, like, the things you say, they just hit right to the heart of the matter.
Isn't it something?
You have a knack."
It's funny, like, I tell people because they don't like, here I am telling my story, and I'm telling it fragmented, which, of course, I have ADHD, but I've always been a writer. I've won awards for writing. Like I'm actually an award-winning poet. I haven't written a poem in years, which is such an ADHD thing to do. Like we'll take something on and master it and then be like, I'm just never going to do that again."
What's next? I can do that. What else can
Yeah,
I do?
it really is. It's like what's the new thing now? And
But that's part of what makes people with ADHD fun and exciting because you kind of don't know what you're going to get.
you don't. And who knows? I might decide to pick up a pen and start writing poems again tomorrow because it'll be fresh again. I think that's the thing when people like forget, like throw their hobbies to the side for a while, like the guilt is usually like, "Oh my gosh, how could I have dropped this? I spent all this time learning it or whatever." You don't know when you'll come back to it. It'll come
Right.
back. And if it never comes back, you had a good time learning it. There is no such thing as a waste when you're learning something new, I don't think. So I did that, and I just started writing freelance full time about ADHD and kept building the blog, went and did some coach training, and here I am coaching and writing about ADHD full time.
And now hosting a
And
podcast.
now hosting a podcast,
Who knows what 2022 will bring?
right? I feel passionate about the diagnosis because being able to be diagnosed and learn about how it works and to tailor my life to fit the way that my brain works changed my life. I'm not the same person that I was when I got diagnosed with ADHD.
Having gone through everything that you've gone through, like a lifetime of not being diagnosed, then finally being diagnosed, then learning as much as you can about it, still learning, becoming a coach. Is there anything that you wish you had known when you first started on your, like something you know now that would have helped you back then, basically?
Find community. Finding other people with ADHD is one of the best experiences you can have because you feel normal and you start to see these things that you do or the impulsive way you behave not as evidence that you are a terrible person who will never get it right, but just as part and parcel of this ADHD thing that you have. And it becomes like, oh, this is a thing that other people are dealing with. So, one, it's not that strange. Two, it doesn't mean that I'm this horrible person. And three, maybe one of them knows how to work with that and make it less of a thing.
And there's so much community out there now. I mean, so many groups,
There's a ton.
whatever social site you go
Yes,
to, wherever you like to hang out, there are people there.
I love it. It's wonderful. Like
Yeah.
those groups were so incredibly helpful to me to learn, to be able to just vent to people who understood. Um, no, they weren't so good on the race angle, but I fixed that. I started my own. Um,
And we're happy that you're sharing, I think your voice is really important and your experience is not unique. We're just not hearing enough about it.
correct.
So I'm really glad that you're willing to let people know what's going on to a lot of people,
Yes.
which wasn't a very eloquent way to say it, but I think you know what I mean.
I knew what you meant. Like it's I am so encouraged by how the community has grown, and I'm interested to see how much more we can grow because we're not done, but we're working on it.
Yep. Please, anybody listening, if you have a question for Renee, or I'm just going to step in here, or a topic that you'd like her to discuss or explore or whatever, send us an email, connect@distractionpodcast.com. You could record a voice memo. I would love somebody to record a voice memo and ask a question or suggest a topic or talk about your experience, whatever. We would love to share more voices on the podcast.
Yes. That's awesome. It was great talking with you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining Sarah and I today. It was really cool being able to share some of my story with you all. It's been a long time since I thought about some of that stuff, so I hope it was helpful to somebody today. Distraction is created by Sounds Great Media. Our producer is the lovely Sarah Gurton, who you've heard on this episode. And I'm René Brooks. You can find me at blackgirllostkeys.com. Until next time.
The episode you just heard was made possible by our sponsor, Landmark College, the college for students who learn differently, offering comprehensive supports for students with ADHD and other learning differences, both on campus and online. Learn more at lcdistraction.org.